On behalf of the CSPC, a very warm welcome to everyone. We're about to participate in a very exciting conference session, number 187, titled Horizons Scan Club, Exploring the Future of COVID Disruptions, organized by Policy Horizons Canada. Before we begin, just a quick number of housekeeping notes. Please turn off, if you haven't already, turn off your videos and microphones. And please also note that this session will be recorded except for the breakout rooms. Also, don't forget to tweet your favorite events and panels at the conference using @SciencePolicy and hashtag CSPC 2020. In the chat box, I'll be adding links to a short survey that should only take a minute or two to fill out. You can fill out this survey at any point during the session, and I encourage you, please do fill it out to help us make CSPC better in the future, especially as we're navigating this new online medium. And without further delay, I'm now going to pass things over to Blaise, who will be the moderator of this session.
Thank you, Amy. Good morning, everyone. Bonjour tout le monde. My name is Blaise Herbert. I'm from Policy Horizons Canada. Before I begin, I just want to introduce my team. We anticipated to have a large group today, so we brought a large group in our team today. So I'd like to welcome Claire, wave your hand, Martin Barry, and
Bonjour.
Aveline Diot. We also have our partner from Ingenium, Jason Armstrong and Michelle Campbell McCarsky. So today, what we're going to be doing is we're going to give you basically a bird's eye view of what we do as an organization and use some of our Foresight tools to actually explore emerging change with you. And so we can co-create some of what the future might look like for Canadian society. So I'm just going to share my screen. Here we go, like this. Just 1 second to get everyone on screen. This is a workshop exercise. It's just a little teeny tiny presentation before we begin. Okay, all right. And my presentation is right here. So welcome. So Policy Horizons Canada, we're a government organization that is here to develop foresight scenarios and help other departments within the government of Canada to basically make their own policies and programs more resilient in the face of the future. So we do this by analyzing the emerging landscape, trying to figure out like what changes are emerging, what challenges are ahead. We engage in conversations with public servants from across the country and from other levels of government and citizens to basically find out what their level of understanding of forward-looking changes are happening. We also build foresight literacy within the public service. So we basically help people develop the muscles that they need to understand the future. We've got a mandate that is government-wide. We're not attached to any single department, and we are governed by a deputy minister steering committee that's made up of several deputy ministers from policy committees from across government. So what is foresight? Well, first of all, foresight starts from the premise that the future is uncertain. There's no data for the future, and so all you can do is kind of like navigate all of the surprises and disruptions that happen. Foresight's an assessment of what might happen, what you need to do in the future. So strategic foresight is the rigorous and systematic process by which we try to understand how an issue or a system could evolve and the challenges and opportunities that might arrive. The goal of foresight is not to predict the future, but to help people assist leaders in envisioning and assessing how things could change and supporting them through and navigating through what the changes can mean for them. So how do we do this? So typically there are 4 big buckets of tools when we're talking about the future. There's horizon scanning, where we look at the environment to see what emerging changes are happening and try to figure out how this may tease out how this may play out. This is, we're going to be doing something like this morning. There's megatrends. Megatrends are basically regressive analysis and other widely known drives of change that basically everyone kind of like assumes when they think about the future. And it gives us a sense of like that assumption of what everybody thinks the future is, so we can determine like what is emerging or disruptive through other means like horizon scanning. They all lead to basically tools that we use to basically design scenarios so that we can test what the future, test and evaluate how well our decisions that we're making today could be resilient in the face of diverse change over time. And then lastly, visioning is all about trying to tease out what's the preferred future for institutions or groups, and like how do we like scaffold the big ideas that we have around the challenges that we're facing. So why do we do this? So we do this because it helps in strategy development. We support decision making in the face of all sorts of disruptions. COVID being the biggest one, like it has completely changed the way governments think about their existing programs. It helps with anticipatory strategic governance. It's also there, strangely enough, one that is not as well as illustrated is the social capital buildings and influencing. You see Foresight, like one of the biggest examples is that politicians will use Foresight to establish visions for themselves and to place themselves in the opposites of other groups. So it's very much like a tool that supports all of those things. So today, what we'll be doing is we'll be working on a tool called an influence cascade. So an influence cascade is like the bread and butter of like the most basic Foresight tool that you could possibly use. So an influence diagram starts with, there's a change driver here, but the change could be anything. It could be an article that you read this morning. It could be something that you found in an interview last week with someone that you were talking to. It could be the analysis of a report that was on your desk that you've been studying. It always starts with something that is new to you. And basically, it always starts with something that's like, wow, that's cool. I didn't know that. And so when we're talking about change and the changes that we'll be talking this morning, they're broken down into two pieces. They try to answer two questions, the what and the so what. So the what being like, why is it new to me? What is it exactly? And the so what being like, what kind of implications could it have? And so what we tend to do with these exercises, and that's what you'll have a chance to do 4 times during this activity this morning, is look at a specific change that an analyst at Policy Horizons has actually written up and try to tease out what could be implications for the future. Now, what's interesting about the future, as I said before, there's no data for the future. So there's no point on debating its plausibility or not. So when we do exercises of the future, we don't tend to block ourselves off into endless debate of what could happen versus what couldn't happen. Because there is a sense that the more that you can tease out what could happen, then you can use that as a frame to see if it already has happened or if it's got a likelihood of actually happening. So when we're thinking about the future, there are 3 orders of thought that we're trying to tease out. So there's the first order, and those are the examples of change that we're already seeing in society today. So these could be things that, so let's say, for example, our change driver was social media and the year was 2006. Then the first order would be like, well, we're starting to see people come together and form communities. We're seeing the rise of online dating, and we're also seeing potential political dissent to having more of a platform. When you move into the second order, we find ourselves more in a transitory world where like we're moving out of the things that we're seeing today and we're starting to do the imagination or using our inductive reasoning to think of what are the consequences of the things that were happening today. Now, you can always play it in 2 ways. You can always say like it could have a direction, so you could see things rising or declining. And so you can ask your question, what like this could happen in this direction, and as a result, it could have this kind of an impact, or vice versa if it's lowered. Then once you get to the third order is very, very much the world that is removed from today. It is that change state. It is the sense that like the world is very different than what we know. And it's basically in that world that you could start evaluating from your institution's perspective, like what are the challenges and opportunities that I might face in the time of these consequences. So the other way to think about this is the weak signals is to think about like how the changes will go if they increase or if they gain momentum. So we're here to explore that space of like the change space of how things move through. Now, when we think of consequences or impacts, and you'll have a lot of time to actually digest what this means today, we try to think as broadly as possible. So we always have these lenses in the back of our head when we're thinking about the future. Now, the lenses basically boil down to thinking about different ways. You know, when we think of a certain change, we sometimes get boxed into a certain thing. So when we think of technology, we tend to think of social change as a result of the technology, but not necessarily of the environment or even the values change that comes out of it. So what I want you to do today is that we all have kind of our bias for what's our favorite space to go into. Try to remember to go into these spaces also. So the as you can see, the acronym stands for STEEP-V. So it breaks down for social lens, a technology lens, economic lens, the environmental lens, which is always very lowly represented in the work that we do, policy or political or governance, depending on your risk tolerance, and values, which tends to be the underlying societal change that we see. So thumbs up if you're ready to go. Thumbs up. Perfect. Sounds good. So I do have a few ground. Oh, I love seeing thumbs up. That's great. I do have a few little ground rules before we get started. So the way that it's going to break down is we're going to read a weak signal. I'll get a chance to all my team members to read a weak signal. It's about a page. We'll read through it, and I will. Oh yes, I will post the document. Martin or Claire, can you post the document inside the chat so everybody has a copy of the PDF? Perfect, thank you. So we will also allow you the time to read it on your own, and you'll have access to the documentation itself. So we will read the weak signal, after which we will take one or two questions that you can use the raise hand function, which is Claire's my go-to person. Where's the raise hand function in Zoom again?
So you need to click participants. So if everyone wants to do that now, and then you will see the option at the bottom to click raise hand. So I see right now, hold on.
Oh, Michelle's got her hand up.
Oh, someone has their hand up.
Elise.
Okay, so now you can also see option to lower hand.
So that's how I'll keep track of the conversation this morning. So we'll read the weak signal. We'll give time for two questions. Now we're looking at burning questions. We're not looking at considerations themselves. So just like if you have a burning question that you don't understand what it is, you can raise your hand. I'll try to answer. Whenever you're speaking, try to be mindful that we're 40 people in the room. So like, don't take more than 30 seconds. The other thing, try to put your question, your comment before, and then if you need to move into an explanation, then go to that afterwards. After the two questions, we'll move into the implications, where we're going to be, I'll just be showing my screen. We'll be doing the exact same thing as the diagram that I showed you before, is we're going to tease out what are first order implications, second order, and third order implications. We'll be doing that for about 16 to 18 minutes per round. So to give you everyone a chance to actually participate. This is a safe space. We're here to actually have conversation. It's good to have lots of people, sometimes that don't know each other, which is very common. We do these types of activities once every Thursday morning, every week. So if you're in government and you're interested in learning more, we can do that. But essentially, that's what we're going to do. And so the ground rules are: be mindful of the time that you spend speaking. We're not here to debate the future. Raise your hand to speak, and then we'll have a good time. If you want a frame to think about what implications should look like, try to see it as what's the title of the article, of the blog, or the tweet that you saw that could illustrate what's happening in society. Okay. So I see that the PDF is on. Just click on the PDF and I will do the same. We'll go for our first weak signal, which I will read. I'll just give you 30 seconds to get things started, and then I will put my timer on so that we're on track. For the note taking, if I could ask Michelle, Jason, and Claire to note take. Does that make sense?
Sure. Yeah, I don't have the boards, but
Oh, okay. Okay, then
let me know. And Jason, you can always
no
send me-
problem. Oh, Evelyn's got the board, so I'll Evelyn.
Nope, nope.
Oh, nope.
I have the board.
Okay, sounds good. Perfect. All right. Are we ready to go? Perfect. So our first week signal is office surveillance comes home. So the what? Employee surveillance tools are making their way into our home offices. Employers are using varieties of technologies known as tattleware and policies to keep tabs on their employees while they work from home, using the "if you have nothing to hide" defense to justify their actions. Some of these surveillance tools include employee and activity monitoring software, remote screen capture, and keystroke tracking. Policies such as frequent daily check-ins and always-on webcam requirements communicate that employees are not trusted to do their jobs while in their own workspace. Could the introduction of home office surveillance inform the future of work in the post-pandemic? So what? One significant impact of the COVID-19 pandemic is the weakening of employees' bargaining power. If more employers start asking their employees to let them into their homes, at-home workers currently have little leverage to refuse. A number of impacts could stem from home surveillance, such as exacerbated mental health issues, decreased trust in employers, and innovative ways to dodge tracking. Artificial intelligence analysis of surveillance data could identify bottlenecks and weak points in production chains, recognize periods where employees aren't working, or accelerate the development of automated management software. Employer surveillance tools could migrate to mobile devices, and many tools could be imported into education systems. So you can see the sources that are on the bottom. So in essence, these have been rising for 8 months, and the question is what could happen as they either gain more in popularity or their usage becomes more common. Are there any questions before we go into the future? This looks like a clear one. Good. So I'll give you about a minute to think about an answer to this question. So as I said before, we're here to explore what change could look like. I want you to think about the technologies and the environment that you're already living now that you've been at work. How have things changed for you? How are things different now that most of us are working from home or working in an isolated and distanced way from each other? How could tattleware and other monitoring service change the way that society looks at work? So I'll give you about a minute to think about it. When you're ready, you can raise your hand, and then I'll ask you to either open your camera and open your microphone and just tell us what you think's going on, and then our note takers will take it down. Alex, welcome to the conversation. Go ahead.
Hi, everyone. I'm Alex Mallet, and I'm an associate professor at Carleton School of Public Policy and Administration. Very interesting exercise, and funny enough, we actually looked at this topic. I teach science, technology, innovation policies, and we read an article, I can't remember who wrote it, but someone at IRPP. And so they did a survey, particularly focusing on government sector workers. And basically they found that the people they surveyed were more open to software that ascertained what websites they looked at, et cetera. But people were very uncomfortable with camera, pictures once in a while and what have you, because they just found it would make people more stressed out and frazzled. So that's sort of what, in terms of comfort level, people were okay with, okay, I don't mind if, they see what websites I've been to, et cetera, but I really don't like being monitored.
Okay, that's good. Thank you. Any other consequences that we're seeing right now? Martin, go ahead.
Yes, I know I'm on the Quebec side, but I know there's been a lot of talk about the behavior of parents in the background of students who are taking classes online. Some parents are not aware that they should be wearing a shirt, or perhaps not smoking a joint, or other types of behaviors, because the kitchen is then an extension of the school, and certain types of behaviors aren't appreciated by other parents.
Okay, that's good. Thank you. Aliza, welcome to the conversation.
I'm going to try and see it. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Okay, good, because I've sorted out my microphones and it wasn't working before. One of the other things you could argue is that for many employers, I would argue that they will have seen through the COVID work from home environment that employees can be trusted. They do get the work done. If an employee had a good work ethic in the office, presumably they still have a good work ethic at home. It was not based on the manager standing over them, watching them. It was based on their own internal drive. The question, of course, can come if the reliable employees are appearing a little less efficient. It may be because their children are at home or they're worried about elderly parents, but that is not something that spying on people will resolve.
That's fair. Thank you. Rafaela, welcome to the conversation. Go ahead.
Good morning. To add on to the earlier point about cameras being on like during online school and that, parents are seen in the background, I think there's also a concern of you don't know what these pictures or videos, like who will end up getting them. And especially in the case of schools, it's young children, vulnerable populations who have their faces like potentially plastered on the web, and that could lead to a lot of privacy issues as well as just pure crime.
That's fair. That's really good. Thank you. Jeffrey Alexander, go ahead.
Hi, yeah, I'm Jeff Alexander. I'm Director of Innovation Policy at the Research Triangle Institute in the United States. One thing I was actually talking to somebody about is the ability to find new solutions like depersonalizing or anonymization software. So there might be more comfort if there are safeguards that enable employers to observe employee behavior but not personalize that data. So find some way that they can actually look at the aggregate patterns, and then these things like doing analysis of bottlenecks and inefficiencies can occur, but without actually kind of seeing into people's personal lives or accessing confidential information about them.
That's really good. Thank you. Next, we have Alessandra.
Yeah, one thing that I think might be impacted by this is the fact that everybody has to pay for their own internet now. It's not employer provided. So having subpar internet could significantly affect your perceived productivity, both in schools, like those test eye movement tracking softwares. The lag can flag you as cheating, and in a workplace, lag can be perceived as you went on break. So then it is up for the employee's financial status to pay for the internet.
That's a really good one. Thank you. Next, I have Liam.
Yeah, hi. I'm not sure if this is already happening, but it seems plausible to me that you could see a stratification between types of employees or different sectors where this kind of surveillance is more or less likely to happen. And it also seems likely that, through biases or other things, like certain types of people are more likely to be surveilled, and there's kind of a privacy stratification.
That's really good. Thank you. Next, I have Joseph.
Hi. It could also undermine union negotiations and unionization efforts, especially if the catalware is always on, and if people aren't particularly careful. So for instance, where I am right now, sound carries through the entire house. So you might be in another room talking about your unionization plans with someone when the computer is listening in on those, undermining and playing your hand.
That's a really good one. Thank you. Next, I have Lucas.
Hi. One thing I was thinking is that sometimes some information is confidential to some groups at work and needs to be shared only among some people before it goes to other groups. But if you have, let's say, keystroke sharing and tracking, people might be wary of discussing things that need to be discussed, afraid of that information leaking too soon.
A very good one. Thank you. So from that, it's funny because we already have like a very well populated first order. I want you to take a second looking at the first order and thinking, what consequences could we see as a result of these moving forward in the second order? I'll give you a second to think about this. Or if you already see a second order from the conversation that we're already seeing right now. Perfect. Lucas, go ahead.
So just to follow track on what I was saying, one thing that might happen is, let's say, people finding alternative channels of communication outside what is being tracked in order to get work done, or even in order to, do other things during the workday.
That's really good. Thank you. Afaida, go ahead.
Stemming from the lack of trust between employer and employee, what could happen is employees spend more energy trying to prove themselves that they're working as opposed to actually doing work. And so the overall productivity goes down.
That's a good one. Thank you. Diane, go ahead.
Yeah, mine's similar to Rafaela's, in that lack of trust or an erosion in trust leads to an increased complexity in doing your job. So there's a direct relationship between the two. So pretty similar.
That's good. Thank you. Next, I have Alex.
Yeah, I mean, I guess the way I see it is that it's almost as if the prevailing social norms will have changed with it, again, think about this pre-pandemic, and some of this seems almost science fiction, and now it's becoming increasingly common to the point that we're having this conversation. So
exactly. Yes. Really good. Thank you. Next, I have Jeffrey.
Yeah, the thing I was thinking about was related to that people finding other ways to communicate is that employers could then take on or try out commercial surveillance techniques, for example, purchasing data from Google for their Google at home devices or their Alexas, so listening in on their employees using other mechanisms that are commercially available rather than relying on what they can install on their employees' machines.
And that in turn is becomes a much more increased cost for the company to take on and potentially increase risk if that data were to be leaked.
Yep.
That's really good. Thank you. Next, we have Alessandra.
The rise in hyperproductivity to the detriment of everybody's mental health.
We're not seeing that right now at all, are we? Michelle, welcome to the conversation. Oh, you're on mute.
Hi, my comment actually follows the previous one as well, just underlying the rise of potential mental health problems in terms of the stress that people will feel being constantly surveyed, the paranoia, just being in a constant state of fear. So mental health problems as well as physical, which manifest into physical health problems.
Definitely. Sitting is the new smoking, right? Next, I have Liam. Go ahead, Liam.
This relates to something someone else said, but sort of an arms race of increased surveillance to increased dodging of surveillance, and like kind of potentially resulting in huge amounts of surveillance, or like a much broader scope of data being captured.
Yes, very true. Next, we have Carrie.
Hi, makes me think about too the expanded, at least the perception of the expanded scope of management. If you can start to see behaviors or elements that are going on in the home, you kind of lose that separation of work and home a little bit more, and you become more concerned about your employees in that context. And so the level of psychological stress on management will increase as well, I think.
Oh, that's a really good one. On the flip side, you could also see value changes of how we manicure our household in order to be seen as good employees. It's just an idea.
Definitely.
Joseph, you're next.
Building on Liam's comment about the arms race between surveillance and surveillance dodging, compromise computer function, because the computer's running so much software to surveil and dodge surveillance that you can't actually get your job done.
That's a really good one. Yeah. Sylvain, welcome to the conversation.
Hi, good morning. Actually, we heard increased productivity, but I think there's also, is it increased or reduced productivity in a sense of if you're stifle creativity, stifle your autonomy, like you just feel boxed in, so you may do the work, but is that your best work? That's my concern.
That's a good one. Thank you. Aliza, go ahead.
What about from the point of view of the employers? What is there any liability situations if they overhear things? So for example, if they hear child abuse, spousal abuse, or crimes being planned, does the employers then have a duty to report or act? So we've talked a lot about what happens from the employee's point of view or trust and the workplace, but what about broader liability?
That's a very good one. Thank you. Liam, go ahead.
I'm not sure exactly how to phrase this, but like a decreased availability of like back channels, or like we all know we have to have the phone call sometimes for the conversation you don't want ATIP'd, but if everything's being tracked, then is it all atypable? And yeah, you can sort of see where I'm going with that.
Yes, I do. That's really good. The back channel is like super important. And like, where is it safe to do so? Do you have to go to encrypted messaging using your WhatsApp or something else? Although WhatsApp is not very encrypted anymore. But that's a really good point. I have time for, I think, one more comment. We're at the hour, so I'm not even going to have time for one more comment. This was really good. I just wanted to show how quickly you got into the headspace of actually thinking of the things that you're seeing right now to thinking about what potential consequences we can see out of it and into a world that is very different than our own, even though it is very tied to the changes that we're having today. So you ready for round 2 then? Could I get Martin to read the second week signal? Martin, are you still with us? Okay, then I will read the second week signal.
Do you want me to do it so you have a...
Oh yeah, sure. Go ahead.
Okay. On August 9th, 2023, YouTuber influencers from the biohacking community injected themselves with a potential COVID-19 vaccine they produced at home. Leading this team is Josiah Zahner, who gained notoriety by attempting to modify his DNA. See regulating DIY genetic modifications. It's in the chat on the document. His collaborators, David Ishii and Darina Dansivia from the Ukraine, are also influencers in the international biohacking community. The series of videos, including the self-injection live stream, seeks to build off a Science magazine article featuring a COVID-19 vaccine prototype published by a team of researchers from prominent institutions across the globe. The video included beginner guide explaining the process and the science and safety behind their stent. The weekly videos now follow the team as they monitor their blood for antibodies. With a booster that took place on August 23rd, 2020, the team has little hopes that their stunt will actually work. And the so what? In their videos, the team is adamant that they are not encouraging others to attempt a similar DIY vaccine. The three influencers have varying knowledge from PhDs and other credentials and advocate for better understanding of the science of vaccine. During the live streams, the engagement from biohackers seemed to indicate a high level of biology and chemistry knowledge. Like any niche internet community, the memes in the chat reveal that status in this community requires a high degree of biological know-how. The sensational self-injection videos lead interested viewers back to the Biohacking 101 videos on their separate YouTube channels, which promote transparency in biological research. Might biohacking influencers play a role in increasing awareness and trust in the field of biology and treatments, e.g. vaccines?
That's really good. Thank you. So we're looking at the role of influencers in the world of biohacking. So the title is like pretty like, you know, it's pretty out there, but again, this is how we're seeing the rise in both the scientific hacking community and the rise of social media. So what could we see as a result of this? I will give you about a minute to think about it, and then we'll start thinking about consequences that we are either seeing today or that we could see into the future. Oh, nice. Already have a whole bunch of hands up. That's really good. You're like pros already. You're all futurists. By the way, everyone's a futurist because we think about the future every day. And like whenever we say, what if this could happen? That makes it futurist. Julianne, welcome to the conversation. Go ahead.
Hi. So it probably doesn't help that I actually did see this series of documentary, like the docu-series on Netflix. So I do know about some of the fallout from their actual experimentations with HIV vaccines. So I don't know if this would actually increase or decrease trust in science. Like it might be a science communication, effort through social media, but you usually need a clinical trial in order to actually, see a vaccine through to completion. You need to have qualified like population sizes. So I don't know, it's really hard to say if this would help the cause of COVID vaccines or actually decrease trust. I think an immediate sort of outcome that I know has happened, so maybe historical precedents are good markers or benchmarks for the future, is that it would create an outcry amongst scientists, like different societies, who would probably very publicly denounce these kinds of stunts, which I think they have done in the past.
Okay, that's good. That's fair. Thank you. Next I have Rafaela. Go ahead.
Basically, this either ends one way, it works, or it doesn't work. So if it works, of course, let's talk about if it doesn't work. So if it doesn't work, there's also two consequences. Either these people just, have no bad health implications. And in that case, then it's a decreased trust in vaccines because vaccines don't work. For the anti-vaxxer community, anecdotes are everything. If these people have severe health complications, there's also two more things that could stem for that. One is that they take up resources in the hospital that are currently devoted to COVID patients, right? If like these people have severe allergic reactions or whatever, then they are taking up hospital beds when we are already over capacity. And two, the anti-vaxxers see this and be like, vaccines will cause things that are worse than autism. And so very severe distrust in vaccines could result.
Okay, thank you. That's really good. Alessandra, go ahead.
The rise of N of 1, or in this case, N of 3 medical studies, which anyone from a science background will scream internally at.
Okay. Aliza, go ahead.
What about increasing the risk of non-science-based concepts for injecting? So bleach and other equally poor options. And so best case scenario, it would be alternative healthcare practitioners who are qualified and are injecting something that is at least legitimate and harmless or potentially slightly helpful for general health. Worst case scenario, you have bleach or the Alex Jones set suggesting the items to be injected, at which point it will be encouraging serious harm.
Or a Tide Pod challenge for COVID patients on TikTok.
Exactly.
Alex, go ahead.
Yeah, I guess similar to the previous comment, but what I was thinking about is the potential for copycats. And, you know, as you say in the premise, right, who's looking at the biohacking website? So people with some sort of knowledge of chemistry and or biology, and then, you know, they would basically take on substitutes. And so within there, what are the potential? And also too, in thinking of the rise of conspiracy theories in the sense that, you know, people might say, oh, well, gosh, why are we paying all this money, you know, to Pfizer and what have you, when, you know, we can just do this ourselves.
That's fair. Liam, go ahead.
Trying to take maybe an optimistic lens, production of sort of early data that could be used to generate hypotheses that could be taken on by the more established scientific structure. Maybe we get a good idea out of it.
Yeah, you could see the kind of the resembling trends of computer hacking in the 70s and 80s moving into more professional state of business practices in engineering, computer engineering. You can see the same thing happen in the biohacking world. Although, yeah, some of these trends have already been captured, I think. Sarah, welcome to the conversation.
Hi, thank you. I think one thing that also comes from this biohacker community is this idea that the science should be accessible to everyone. And they're really big on, I want to have just as much access to these big CRISPR technologies and all of this that the average scientist would have. And I think that's definitely something that's going to trickle down into the future as well. This idea that people are going to want access to things that they maybe aren't qualified to have access to. And the question then there is, do we allow the everyday non-scientists to have access to these kind of technologies?
That's a really good point. Thank you. All right. Again. Oh, Rafaela, go ahead.
To add on to Sarah's point about regular people having access to things that they really should not have access to, there's also the ethical implication. If it's this times it's just vaccines, but other times it's CRISPR, like genetic modifications, then you have that whole bioethics of what should be modified, what should not be modified, that scientists have entered a social contract to kind of follow, but regular people do not have that background to understand the ethics.
Good point. Thank you. That's really good. You're already going into, you basically took the pen from, or a page from my book. You're already going into the second order of what we could see as a result of this. So again, you have a good set of understanding for what's happening today or what's on the cusp of tomorrow. What can we see in the second or the potentially the third order if we go into the rise of accessibility for non-traditional means, or the change in the social contract from a scientist's perspective? Or what does it mean where anyone can do new things with genetics and other things? Lucas, go ahead.
Yeah, very close to what other people were saying. I think it increases the risk of an ill-intentioned agent to do something harmful with it, some genetic modification to viruses or something else. I'm not part of the community, so I don't know. I know how possible that is. But if any average person can get a hold of it, then maybe people that we don't want to have access could do something with it.
Good point. Thank you. Alessandra, go ahead.
A second wave of snake oil salesman medicine.
That's fair. Sarah, go ahead.
A second part of what I was saying as well is, what if this gets in the hands of people who have devious intentions? Just biased because I did see the Netflix documentary as well, and he mentioned that, oh, this group from Iraq just happened to also send me an order, and they wanted to modify the anthrax genome. So things like that are becoming so accessible, people think, oh, well, like if this is so easy, then what if it gets into the hands of someone with less good intentions?
Very true. Thank you. Liam, go ahead.
You could see sort of a gray market, like knockoff vaccine market established, ones that people have made in their garage or whatever, based on one that is established and known to work.
Good. Julien, go ahead. Oh, you're on mute. Julien, you're on mute.
Oh, sorry. I'm muted. I'm not muted now. Thank you. I like how you're kind of like, wow. So I was talking about a shift in values, basically within the biohacking community or just biology in general, because they have no regulatory oversight either from the institution in terms of ethics review boards. No one knows what the heck they're doing. So this is something that they've taken on themselves. I am personally conflicted about whether or not that will work, but that is the kind of move that people have made in order to account for that.
Good, thank you. It's okay to think outside of our own kind of limits for this. Like we're here to explore the disruptions, right? In a sense, we're here to disrupt, or we're here to understand the emerging sense. So it's not necessarily what is already within the trend. It's kind of like we're looking what's outside of the trend vis-a-vis the weak signal or the examples of change that we're seeing. Eliza, go ahead.
Just to think about a potential positive, what if it essentially makes the science more accessible in a positive way? So you don't need to have a massive lab, extensive skills, many years of education. What if it's opened up so that intelligent people who can't get the access to can't afford to do a master's and a doctorate and a postdoc, but are intelligent, can manage to do things and make discoveries that they otherwise would not. Just as with computer hacking became more accessible. At one time, computers were the size of a football field, and now we carry them around in our purse. And you can hack and you can do things that we couldn't have thought possible in a positive way, allowing us to work from home and have a board like this on our screen. What if you have the biological equivalent?
That's a good point. Thank you. Carrie, go ahead.
To take a positive spin, like what if it works? But then on the negative side, if it's the bad actors, piece that we're talking about from an economic perspective, what if it becomes so, it's sort of, they hold out on the technology until the right price comes along, and what does that do, and who's willing to pay?
That is good. Thank you. I swear, sometimes people say bad things, so I know I say that's good, but that's like really good. You guys are doing great work. Thank you. Lucas, go ahead.
Yeah, so following like the possible bad consequences of bad actors and I don't know, snake oil salesmen, maybe this technology gets outlawed and heavily monitored and surveilled, something like we would have, enriched nuclear material, something that you need to have either clearance, and it's often linked to subversive actions and things like that. So we might need, intelligence services and governmental departments to actually keep track and surveil what kinds of biohacking are happening to make sure that, nothing like bad actors having access to it ever happens.
Perfect. I just want to say that we're at the 2-minute mark, so I can take about four other interventions. Rafaela, go ahead.
Warfare becomes a lot more involving of civilians if it turns into biological warfare, because terrorists are using technologies such as CRISPR to modify viruses that will give people infective diseases and so on. And then as going back to the earlier point, holding ransoms being we have the antidote for this virus. Do you want to pay however much money
so that you can get it, or do you want all your civilians to die?
Oof. Oof. That's a scary world. That's a good one. Thank you. Alex, go ahead.
Yeah, I guess getting back to a potential positive or in thinking about accessibility, in looking at the use of substitutes in a good way is, the rise or acceptability of what's called, I've heard punk science. And so I remember there was a prof at Memorial, and basically she was using nylons or what have you to get stuff from, the oceans. And so it just speaks to, okay, well, how to make it more accessible to people. So.
Okay, good. I have time for one last comment. If there's something that someone's got something burning that they need to share. Perfect. That's good. Well, that was really good. Thank you so much. And then we'll go to our third week signal. Claire will be reading out our third week signal.
Great. Okay, so microbiome treatments for COVID-19. Researchers have linked the microbiome to regulating the immune system and our ability to fight COVID-19. Recent reports suggest that COVID-19 is strongly linked to the gastrointestinal tract and that there is some correlation between severe patient response to the disease and imbalanced or damaged gut microbiomes. Strong immunity systems and diverse biomes, microbes and foreign cells affected by genetics, environment, toxicity, lifestyle, and age, promote effective healing from COVID-19 and lessen the severity of symptoms, lowering death rates. With the time required to develop an effective vaccine, researchers, pharma companies, and individuals are looking at other ways to fight and treat the novel coronavirus. Some researchers claim that as the virus mutates, microbiome treatments may be more effective than vaccines and may help with other flu strains or future pandemics. In April 2020, Persephone Bioscience announced that they would begin clinical trials for an AI-driven microbiome therapeutic and diagnostic program for COVID-19. It could be used as a one-time treatment at the onset of symptoms to help strengthen the immune system or combined with a vaccine. It may promote faster recovery from the virus and prevent life-threatening symptoms. The organization believes these and future microbiome treatments could save thousands of lives by strengthening immune responses to viral infection while extending the immunity from the vaccines. So what? As the search for an approved vaccine continues, other innovative research and treatments are underway in the quest to understand and treat COVID-19. Microbiome research has made strides in recent years in fields such as gut health, mental health, depression, and neurological diseases, including Parkinson's. In addition to our DNA, over half the human body is made up of our biome. Given its growing role in our chemical makeup and potentially in how we acquire and fight infection, scientists are conducting a microbiome project, sequencing various strains of human biome. As we learn more about the human immune system, could microbiome and other treatments become part of the public health toolbox? Given the time required to develop a vaccine, what other treatments may be deployed or trialed in the desperation to get back to economic and social life as we knew it? Could the DIY bio community develop unregulated treatments? How does the regulatory framework participate in and adopt such diverse and complex innovative treatments? And how could apps, technology, and personalized medicine play a role in these emerging treatments?
Thank you, Claire. So, thinking about microbiome and gut health and the treatments that can come out of it. What are some, oh, wow. What are some things that we're seeing right now? Things that are on the cusp of reality. How could we see it affect our lives right now? Rafaela, go ahead.
Very immediate effects on the scientific community. The next round of CIHR grant proposals are going to be mostly the gut microbiome.
Really? Oh my God. Wow.
Well, based on that, just like currently how the next round is definitely like COVID related. And also just if the biohacking community gets their hands on this, I can see very negative health consequences, such as autoimmunity diseases coming from them trying to mess with the immune system, as well as very like opportunistic bacterial infections, such as C. diff, when they mess with the gut microbiome.
That's good. You're already playing like three-dimensional chess by taking another change and adding it on top. That's really good. Thank you. Aliza, go ahead.
Sorry, had a technical issue. This is interesting because in the holistic health community, this is actually well known. And so it's interesting that it's going mainstream. It's another thing that's gone from that community into mainstream, in the sense that gut health is linked to everything from mood, general immune function, and obesity, among other things. But my question would be, how would they, in terms of popping a pill versus why not just encourage fermented foods and less sugar? I don't really see how there could be that many opportunities for, I could see some companies wanting to make products, but they're not actually proven that effective. The probiotic market isn't actually that effective other than a handful of strains proven for specific purposes. But by and large, wouldn't just healthy eating be wiser in promoting that?
Good question. Jason? You're on mute.
Going to the, in joining with the last one, biohackers form a gray market for desirable poop.
That's a good one. Thank you. Alessandra, go ahead.
I can see a huge antimicrobial resistance crisis looming if you just start taking strange bacteria all the time, especially like normally medicine expiration dates are important because it changes the composition. Bacteria doesn't have an expiration date. It changes the entire time.
That's really good. Alex, go ahead.
Yeah, I mean, I guess I'm going to build on what Aliza was saying earlier, but I mean, in thinking about it, think of our own experiences at the doctor's office. I mean, when do they ever ask us about our diet? They'll ask us if we smoke or drink or do recreational drugs, and that's about it. And it speaks to, all right, well, maybe we need to shift in, a number of books that I've read too, medical professionals say, oh gosh, we cover nutrition 1 week. And so it also speaks to maybe there's a potential for a cultural shift just in terms of the medical professions and how they engage with patients.
It could really much increase their complexity when thinking about patient health.
Mm-hmm.
That's very good. Joseph, go ahead.
So this is an AI-driven therapeutic and diagnostic program in this particular example. So it could create a division of trust where people who say trust AI to do things better than humans will go with the treatments, whether or not they've been vetted. And then people who just inherently distrust AI may start to distrust medical science because it's being driven by AI.
That's fair. You trust your Spotify to get your music, but WebMD to get your prescription? Maybe not. Julianne, go ahead.
Hi. So this is actually building off of the comment about shifting values in the medical profession, but I was thinking more in the research field, right? So changing right now, you evaluate the efficacy of a drug or vaccine based on like very targeted one-to-one kind of relationships, whereas this microbiome treatment might require a more broader kind of metric of performance, basically. So if you could shift that, that might actually open up the ability for people to evaluate things like traditional Chinese medicine, like these other kinds of alternative therapies that don't get the same credit as biomedicine.
That's good. Thank you. Liam, go ahead.
that kind of spurred another one in me, so I might try and squeeze in two. One is something that is already being seen as kind of a starting to establish the sort of microbiome as a target for pharmaceutical companies more broadly, or as sort of a new therapeutic area. And maybe the flip side of giving more credibility to other alternative forms of medicine that aren't well vetted is like those are often or can be well established in like anti-vax or other kind of anti-scientific communities. So like it could, in a sort of reverse way, lend credibility to some of the unscientific approaches to medicine.
Okay, good, thank you. Any others? Either what we're seeing right now or what we see as a secondary order, or maybe tempt fate and try your hand at taking the secondary orders and thinking of the consequences of a changed world. What are things or changes that we could see kind of outside of our horizons or just over? Maybe there are dips into science fiction that we can take inspiration from. Rafaela, go ahead.
Going off the second order point of antimicrobial resistance crisis now, because of bacterial infections causing the use of antibiotics causing antibiotic resistance, new CIHR proposals on like phage therapy and other non-antibiotic methods of treating bacterial infections.
Oh, that's good. Thank you. Alessandra, go ahead.
Since you said science fiction, basically genetically engineering bacteria to make an optimal human.
Yeah, and then that's a dynamic system, right? Because optimal is like with a changing environment, if you add like the worsening of climate change, that could even like that could change every 5 years. The optimal human needs to be pushed even further. Jason, go ahead.
Insurance companies requiring you to submit a sample of your gut bacteria before they offer you different amounts of coverage.
That's a good one. I just saw Rafaela's latest comment in the chat. That's really good. They gain IQ with the gut pill, with the poop pill. Julianne, go ahead.
So I think this is maybe more abstract. So in terms of like thinking about how technology in general is designed. So instead of like, well, let's get rid of these microbes because they're against us, trying to design technologies that much more like partnerships with different kinds of entities. So like that would transform, like let's say designing solutions to climate change. So working with fire, let's say, versus trying to prevent it. Yeah.
That's really interesting. So looking beyond our own gut health and looking at the output of what it could build off in the environment. Liam, go ahead.
People becoming unwilling to take antibiotics because they don't want to mess up their gut health.
Kind of like believing that my present state is the best state and I don't want anything to change. Alex, go ahead. Oh, you're on mute.
Sorry, I guess I was thinking of perhaps if we look at food and how it's labeled, so we could add another column in terms of diversity of microbiome, just make it commonplace in parlance.
Good. We have time for a bit more. If I burned you on this, if it was too long, we can move on to the next one. Rafaela, go ahead.
Spinning off on the unwillingness to take antibiotics from now on point, that might actually be a good thing for the current problem of overprescription of antibiotics and thus the cause for antimicrobial resistance in the first place.
Ooh, could you see like either a viral marketing campaign pushing to like reduce the use of antibiotics. Oh, that could be interesting. Ooh. Social media actors going viral with campaigns of okay. I'm going to give it one more minute, and then if we're out, we'll go on to the last one because the last one's a bit big. Any last points before I close it up? If your brain hurts, that's okay. That's a sign that you're a real futurist. Okay, good. All right, we'll go for our last week signal. Give me 1 second. Just gonna go the timer, and that gives us 20 minutes. Go. Okay, so one conspiracy to rule them all. What? Following recent anti-mask, anti-lockdown protests in London, Boston, and Berlin, the BBC's anti-disinformation unit identified a growing convergence amongst the QAnon conspiracy community and those focused on 5G signals, GMO, chemtrails, vaccination, and the COVID-19 pandemic. Analysis of the tech's practices and activities common to the communities suggests that QAnon is the dominant factor in this convergence. It provides the central logic for a meta-conspiracy that unites these groups into an elect, with the shared reality based on deep truth and a sense of purpose framed as an epic struggle of good versus evil. Online and real-life manifestations of this conspiracy convergence, including among evangelical churches in the US and Canada, have expanded so rapidly that watchdog Hope Not Hate cannot even track them. So what? In a future where a majority of conspiracy enthusiasts have coalesced into a single community framed by a QAnon meta-conspiracy, that conspiracy could become a mainstream political ideology and its adherents an influential political movement with transnational reach. Coherent and unified messaging from this movement might spread distrust in government, science, and so-called elites. This might weaken democratic institutions, further marginalize traditional knowledge authorities, and challenge social peace. Governments that perceive the movement as a threat might opt to crack down, adopting intrusive online surveillance countermeasures with negative consequences for privacy and civil liberties. At the same time, populist authoritarian governments might gain strength from such a movement, with significant repercussions for international relations, trade, and efforts to implement the UN Sustainable Development Goals. A significant mainstream meta-conspiracy presence could push democratic governance to adopt retrograde social policies, or at least slow the attempts to address systematic justice and equalities. Groups interested in such policies might radicalize in response, deepening polarization, intensifying cultural wars, and heightening risks of social and political violence. On the other hand, crisis provoked by an active meta-conspiracy community could invigorate efforts to address social, economic, cultural, and technological conditions that propelled QAnon from the internet's shadowy recesses to the status of political ideology. So we're looking at the meta-conspiracy on top of it. So the questions for consideration for this week's signal are, what are the implications of a strong community working on and offline, animated by profound distrust of government, elites, and science, and imbued with a sense of righteous mission? And the other one is, what if this new extent of integration across communities and therefore platforms makes tech-based interventions an unwinnable game of whack-a-mole? So this is the big one. So what could we see as a result of the rise of these meta-conspiracy communities, and what could their impacts be on society itself? I'll give you a minute to think about it, and I'll take some water because that was a long one. We can start with what you're seeing right now. Rafaela, go ahead.
What we're seeing right now, a huge distrust in science, as well as just the scientists, the doctor, and the pharma industries, which will lead to public health issues because people aren't taking the recommendations seriously.
Okay, good. Alex, go ahead.
Yeah, I guess what we're seeing now is the rise of people moving to alternative platforms. Like I think one is called Parler, as Facebook and Twitter basically make comments or no, this is fake news, etc. So you're going to see more gravitation towards that. Yeah.
Okay. Sarah?
Sorry. I think this also kind of brings up this idea of what we define as science literacy and like how that's implemented in society, and the idea of whether this is actually reaching all marginalized individuals and all these kind of cracks and crevices of society. Like, how do we actually imply like effective communication to target those people specifically?
That's really good. Thank you. Joseph, go ahead.
Democratic election of conspiracy theorists, which we're seeing, actually we saw in the US election most recently.
Yep, 5 Congress people and 1 senator. Eliza, go ahead.
If the argument is that they're feeling left out of the economy and their future, so they've been susceptible to grooming to be skeptical of elites, then perhaps how do we address that and the grooming factor and the underlying economic conditions?
Good point. Thank you. Liam, go ahead.
Yeah, building on the elected part, have people working in government who believe that the entire government is like covering up whole things, and I haven't really thought through where that could go yet, but yeah.
It gives us, great faith in the abilities to do things, right? If we're able to manage all these conspiracies. I remember seeing a meme a couple of weeks ago. It's like, if you think that I'm like behind as a doctor, if you think I'm behind all of these conspiracies, you must have a lot of faith in the work that I do and my ability to do my job. Jeffrey, go ahead.
Yeah, I'm wondering about the rise of competing conspiratorial camps. So Parler is backed by the Mercer family, who also backed Steve Bannon in Breitbart and all these other kind of ventures. So there is on the other side a progressive leftist conspiracy group that's convinced that conservative powers that be are behind everything, and you just have this kind of potential for a really severe ideological kind of battle where neither side is actually based in reality, right? So you have completely separate worldviews that in fact are completely free of real kind of fact-based discussion, and that could be, pretty catastrophic.
Post-truth warfare. Afeda, go ahead.
With every ideological extremism comes families who don't agree with each other, comes homeless youth because the kids believe in one thing and their parents believe in another, and they can't seem to communicate. And then that will, with families being broken up because of ideology, then that leads to a lot of social problems of, as I said, homelessness, or like even education problems, because these kids obviously will not be going to school if they can't go home.
That's really true. And it's funny, like we're already starting to see the effects of the long-term effects of family discordance when it comes to those types of ideologies or the emergence of that. So it's a really good point to think about, like, again, broken homes and homelessness as a social consequence of that. That's very strong. Thank you. Alessandra, go ahead.
I was going to say basically the same thing, but we can take it even further. It's not just homes that will be broken up. It's your political or conspiracy ideology may eliminate you from certain careers.
Yes.
And we're kind of already seeing that with academia on some level in the US, but it will be at every stage.
you could potentially see the rise in like cancel culture coming from like all sides in a sense. It's like being burned by one side, try to kind of precludes you from anything associated with them. But like in a world where there's multiple axes to that one side, then that like again makes it even more complex. Julianne, go ahead.
So I was thinking about alternative social spaces, kind of like at the parlor. But I was thinking about the media and how this is a really important place that controls a narrative, and different people fund them. So like this is a source of information that people go to. So the effects of conspiracy theories in terms of shaping the landscape of the media, basically, broadly speaking.
That's good. Thank you. Lucas, go ahead.
So to me, I think this shows what's happening right now is like a huge crisis of authority, who has the right or the knowledge to say what's true and what's not. And in a way, it resembles a lot the crisis of authority in the 16th century, in which the scientific method arose as a way where every reasonable people could agree on, as they did in mathematics before. So as a way to sort of solve those social conflicts and the wars, ideological wars. So maybe what could happen next is, if we do get to those conspiracy theory battles and divided society, is to look for a new authority, because science is not cutting it, because people have realized that science is also political. So we need still another step into something that can cut across those divides, where again, quote unquote, every reasonable people could agree on. So a search for a new authority, a new basis of knowledge.
Interesting. Could that lead us to artificial intelligence? I'm kidding. Eliza, go ahead.
To follow up on the comment about families broken with homeless youth, the flip side is if the parents indoctrinate the children from a very young age, you end up with one of two scenarios. Children who can't continue in school because they've been groomed by parents to believe the conspiracies, they're receiving different information from school. They conclude, they either conclude that this is, this is all wrong, and they leave, and it's drives them further into the conspiracy world, or else they flunk out because they're proposing things that are not true. They keep getting poor grades. They just drop out, not quite understanding why. The flip side also is if the parents see what's happening in the schools with the wrong ideas, they homeschool the children. And either way, you end up with children who are uneducated, unemployable, and doomed to a life of poverty and conspiracies.
It's true, or potentially, yes. Yes, thank you. Sarah, go ahead.
I think we're kind of already seeing this already, but it'll be interesting to see what side this kind of ends on, is to think about the role of social media in all of this, and whether they're going to take the side of being this open platform that facilitates freedom of thought and speech, or whether they're going to go the opposite way and be this kind of fact-checked, regulated platform. So it kind of depends on which flip side it goes to, but both of them have kind of these different consequences. So we'll see.
That's good. Alex, go ahead.
I guess one thing that's come to mind, and I mean, we're in a situation where things are happening now. And again, it speaks to, okay, where do we go from here? And what I'm reminded of is the work of Sunstein. And basically back in 2001, 2007, he was talking about echo chambers. And so, when I was young, right, we had, just a couple TV channels and everybody could talk about things because, you could only watch certain things. Whereas now we're in our own little personalized virtual worlds. And so as we think about schools, that was sort of the one structure, at least in Canada, where the bulk of the population went through the public school system. But now we're seeing homeschooling, we're seeing these little pods, we're seeing that some students are virtual, some are in person, and so it becomes harder to counteract some of this thinking, like in terms of through the curriculum or what have you. So yeah.
Thank you. Lucas, go ahead.
Yeah, Blaise, I would take you up on your point of maybe people will start trusting AI more because, AI works. So maybe that's the best substitute for truth when we have, a crisis of authority. As people were saying on the previous point, if AI treatment works best than, what my doctor orders, whether it's true or not, it works. That's what matters. So maybe we start taking on, AI policy making, AI governance, AI treatments, AI, whatever advice, because whether it's true or not, and who knows what's truth, right? Like everything is political. So let's trust on AI to use all its stats-based knowledge to show at least what works, because then we can agree on that. So that could be a way forward.
That's good. Thank you.
Not the one that I like, but it
No,
could
no,
be.
no. Again, that's it. It's devoid of our personal preference.
But it could happen.
Yep. Yeah, I could see it. Yeah, that's good. Okay, I'll take the last two comments of Liam and Rafaela. Try to keep them as short as possible. I just want to do the close up and then allow Amy to do the evaluation piece. So Liam, go ahead.
Mine's not nearly as exciting. The balkanization of social media into like further refined subcategories. I think we're starting to see.
That's good. Thank you. And Rafaela, you have the last word for today's workshop.
To add on to the point of dropouts and badly homeschooled children, you also have children who stay within school but do not believe anything their teachers say because of fundamental ideological differences. And these children do not learn the critical thinking skills that are required to survive in the adult world.
That's really good. Thank you very much. Okay, so I'd like to thank everybody for participating today. We had such a great time to do this. It's always so fun to see new people actually interact with the content and think, have a first time thinking about how they could see society change in the face of all this change. So thank you very much. I'd like to thank my my collaborators for this this workshop. So Martin Barry and Claire from Policy Horizons, and Jason and Michelle from Ingenium and the Museum of Science and Tech. You guys have been really amazing. And if you want to contact us, you can, if you want to contact any of us, our emails are here. You can follow Policy Horizons on our website. We have all tremendous amounts of reports and other things that you can have access to. I'm also the outreach person for most things of the organization. So if you want to reach out to learn more about us, you can just send me an email or Claire an email. All right. So thank you very much, and I'll turn it back to Amy so she can do the evaluations.
Thanks, Blaise. I want to thank Policy Horizons Canada for this excellent session, and I'd also like to thank the participants for their excellent participation in the session. I'm going to put the survey link into the chat box one last time and encourage you, please, to fill the survey out and give us your feedback on this session as well as the conference as a whole as you go through it this week. Thanks everyone, and have a great conference.
Great. Well, have a great day, everyone. It was nice to see you, and I hope to see you in the future. Take care.